Hello, beautiful souls, beautiful co creators. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Carly. And in this creative revival chat, I wanted to address just a simplification on inner authority, outer authority, what are the essential differences, and three ways that outer authority in particular can really hook into us. How do we submit to outer authority? How does it manipulate us, whether we're aware of it or completely unaware of it? How does it get its tentacles in there? So we're going to look at the three fears, key fear areas that really allow outer authority to take its grip. And of course, by being aware of these three areas, we start to understand what it is that we're shifting, where we need to bring our tools and our strategies and our awareness and our healing so that we can release those fears, have a healthier relationship with those three areas, and therefore have an easier time shifting into our inner authority. So, briefly, outer authority, inner authority, specifically, and how I'm speaking to it. Um, if I had to break it down in a really easy way, outer authority, God is outside of you. And yes, eventually in the authority conversation, we are talking about God, what that means, what all of us seek internally when we are dealing with, when we're that the quest eventually leads to the conversation of God. It just does. It's where it all goes, whether we are, however we feel about it at a current moment, that is eventually where we are going. And so, outer authority, essentially, that God is outside of you. And that means that knowledge, I'll bring in my notes here just for a second because I really want to be exact with my language here. Okay, so knowledge, goodness, evil, power, accountability, connection, love, creative inspiration, forgiveness, transformation. This is all outside of you. This is something that somebody else or something else has to give to you. God is outside of you. And when we live from that paradigm, which we have been living in for thousands and thousands of years, when God is outside of us, we create in order to desperately seek, need God, to punish God, to avoid or deny God, or to compete with God, right? So our creative energy becomes caught up in these kind of external activities. Now, when we move into inner authority, what I invite you to consider, to just sit with, okay, is that God, the concept, the meaning, which will go very deeply within and is a very individual journey, which is part of this inner authority shift. So, what that means to each of us is within us. When we understand that God is within us, then we understand that knowledge, goodness, also evil, power, accountability, connection, love, forgiveness, transformation, creative inspiration is always within us, is always accessible, and is always expanding. So when we understand this, then the reason that we create is actually to explore and to share God, that highest inspiration. And I'm going to correct something actually in what I said because I did say that evil is also within us or evil is outside of us. And while there's truth to that, when we talk about the subconscious um, and and the purification process, um, I would actually say that in the inner authority shift, as we move more into that, that what is within us, we find that it's more the fear, the illusion that evil is actually this thing that happens when we're when we're in outer authority. Inner authority, it clears. Just something to consider that I wanted to note there because I misspoke. Um, Okay, so how does outer authority really get its grips? What are the three areas that we can bring to our awareness so that we are able to more easily shift into inner authority? And what I would consider is kind of the three big fears, because we could say, oh, everything is about fear and love, but I would like to get a little bit more specific. where, what is kind of the core of our fears? If we wanted to break them down into um, uh, the more specific feelings and areas that our fear kind of expresses through. And I want to talk about the fear of shame, the fear of death, and the fear of power. In in astrology, an archetypal understanding of self or fear, then we look at the eighth house in astrology, right? That's kind of what is considered the subconscious mind, right? The scary, the house of Scorpio. The eighth house, the house of the occult, of esoteric. Why? Because it's dealing with this this fear, um, this fear energy, and and how and how to master it. So if you think of our creative force, all right, and maybe this is a little bit of a controversial image to give, but I want you to think of the creative force for a moment, the force of all life, the creative force as that snake energy, right? As the serpent, that it is creative power, spiritual power is that, okay? But creative power is neutral. And what I mean by that is not that it's neutral, like it doesn't create anything. It's here to create. What I mean is that it can create for the good, it can create according to higher law, it can create in alignment to what some would call God. I would go ahead and call Christ consciousness stream or sacred divine law. Or it can create anything else that is kind of getting further and further away from what we would consider that sacred divine law, right? That harmonic, that perfection that we seek. And so creative power does not have a good or an evil way of a good or evil um, inherent value, right? It is the tool, it is the hammer. So it is up to every single individual, and that's why so much is about responsibility to choose how they want to use their creative power. All right. So it looks like I started with power. So let's talk about power first before we get into shame and death. So if we fear, so what we're doing with power, if we think of that the snake, the knowledge, the understanding of how this universe works, right? It's that is rising within us, and it is that we fear because we have seen in the outer world. And if we believe in reincarnation, I feel that to be true, have experienced that to be true, but of course we all have different perspectives. But if we remember, if we have within our physical memory the fear of abuse of power, whether we have done it, we have seen it outside of us. And again, in many of the stories that are told and how you can be manipulated, you'll see that there's always kind of like, you'll hear the saying in storytelling, the character is either fighting for love or for power. And this is very interesting because oftentimes when we are discussing power, we are taking it out of love. And we are discussing power from the perspective of dominating, which is outer authority, right? Outer authority, there is always someone who, there is domination, and there is someone who submits, right? Someone has, and someone does not. So when God is within us, when we're in inner authority, when we shift out of this kind of dualistic outer authority perspective, God comes within us. Power is now a natural state of being, and we are now responsible for how we use that power. We are responsible for the knowledge that must be acquired on how to use that power and how divine law actually works, and acting according to it. And not out of fear or obligation, but because we actually deep down, I truly believe in what I teach, that when that alignment happens, what we all seek is to align to that sacred divine power. And so this is not a force. It's like an aha. It's like, oh, wow, this is actually what I've been seeking my entire life, and I just didn't know it. But because we fear power, We fear going on that journey. We fear the mistakes that we make. We fear the misuse of power. And therefore, power kind of always becomes associated with evil and abuse and material needs. And people that have that are really okay with being with evil behavior, or have kind of denied their moral compass or a connection to God or any kind of inner authority, and are completely about their outer authority, their outer paradigm being satisfied, easily aligned to power, which is why we're in this power battle right now, right? Which is why we are in the power struggle that we are. But when that inner authority shifts, when we stop fearing power and we instead say, creative power, spiritual power, rise. I take responsibility for myself. I take responsibility for what I create. I take responsibility for learning what is, if all is God, all is unity, all is the unified field. Yes, but not all is sacred. Not all is divine. And as a human on my conscious evolutionary, on my journey, my job is to align to that is sacred, that we would consider the Christ stream, that we would consider divine law, which creates an harmonic field. It is coming from the law of one, from the true understanding of unity. But each of us has a choice. When that creative power comes online, there are those, and you can align to other things and use your power in a different way, but there are also consequences for doing so. So it is to, I believe, all of our benefit that we understand and differentiate, that we have to develop discernment on this journey of embracing our power so that we can align to higher law for the sake of our own creation and for each other, so that there is such a thing as correct knowledge and what we'd call false knowledge. All right, so that is fear of power. That's one way that the tentacle comes in. Now we also have fear of death and fear of shame. So fear of death, it's pretty straightforward, I think. If we fear death, we strictly live according to survival instincts, and we can be easily manipulated through death threats, whether they be accurate, meaning there is actually a danger at your door. Imagined, somebody tells you that there's a danger at your door, but there really isn't. Or exaggerated. The danger at your door is not necessarily something that could end your life tomorrow. It's just a general, maybe a less pleasant experience. Okay, so the fear of death, when we believe in death, when we think that it is really only one life, first of all, we're living in a falsehood. I understand that in itself may not resonate with some people because it's going to challenge some belief structures. But I invite you to just consider that deep down feeling and that inner knowing. Do you really think that life takes its first breath, that energy, can ever be depleted? So I'm not saying that I understand everything that exists on all sides before and after. But I do believe that each of us, even through our logic, that we arrive at the place where we understand that that consciousness and so much of this experience is much bigger than what we perceive and how we understand one conscious biological life at this moment in time. So in many ways, this is why it becomes a spiritual journey, because in order to overcome fear of death, in order to have courage, in order to raise that vibrational field, we have to kind of confront the falsehood of death itself, which can be a bit of a struggle. And then we have actual death, right? Physical death. But because of that physical death, we also have the stories and the fear of death in all aspects of our life, and anything that we create, in the people that we love. And so we develop these attachments to things. We want things to stay the same. And yet change is the inevitable reality of creation. Everything is constantly changing. And so when we fear death, we fear change. And when we fear change, We fear the essential truth and reality of this universe and creation. So we need to shift as we're working on and bringing awareness to the fear of death, understanding less death and more transformation. Death being a lie of sorts, transformation being very real. Transformation is how energy, or everything is always transforming. But does it ever die? No, not really. And the last one is fear of shame. So that's the other way that outer authority kind of grips into us, is that we have this inherent fear of the experience of shame, of being humiliated, rejected, cast out. The shame in groups is it's one of the strongest ways to kind of force people into a certain behavior, or the fear of punishment, because we don't want to feel that we don't know how to experience shame. We are ashamed of our shame. And so, and shame is one of, if you're familiar with David Hawkins, consciousness spectrum, when we talk about the vibrational fields, the lowest vibration that we can experience, the lowest vibrational field is shame. But shame is so much of the core. We also have this idea that, if you have pride, if you have anger, that the when it's on his consciousness spectrum, he has, right, there's like shame, then guilt, then I believe grief, apathy, anger, pride, essentially something like that all go up, and then eventually you hit courage, which is where energy stops imploding or destroying itself and starts to expand and create, is when it can overcome and move into the vibrational field of what we experience as courage, the overcoming of fear. But shame is what sits below all of these other experiences. And so for me, when I'm looking at fear, and when I speak to how outer authority, programs, works, manipulates, and works against us, shame is at the core of of every lower vibrational story and experience in the body. So we want to develop our tools. We want to have a much deeper understanding of shame, why we experience it, where it comes from, how it's expressed in our body, and to develop a strategy, a healthy way of working through that feeling that is transformative, that allows us to take whatever wisdom is maybe being experienced, whatever learning, because sometimes we experience shame because we actually morally we do something wrong according to our own inner integrity, and so that if we can process shame and recognize, like, ooh, I'm feeling that because I actually lied, right? That would be a great example. So let's say you lie to a friend or a loved one in a bigger way, and you experience some shame after that. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? That feeling is saying, you acted out of integrity. Now you have to deal with it. You've got to face it. You don't need to punish yourself. And that is what so many of our outer authority stories have done, is that it becomes all about punishing, which is very self-indulgent at a certain point. But you need to face why you lied. What was really happening? What truth were you really afraid of? Who were you afraid of losing? What death were you afraid of? Where were you fearful of power and taking responsibility? And so when we have a healthy relationship with shame, we can allow ourselves to feel it and get to the root of where it's actually coming from, so that we can address that and grow from it, and then release the emotional experience. So shame no longer becomes something that we avoid, but a helpful emotional indicator That may be something that maybe we acted out of integrity in some way. So we need to take a look at it. Now, in the same way, maybe we didn't, or maybe we acted out of integrity according to somebody else's authority, a loyalty to family or friends, something that, but again, it was untrue for us. And so that shame, that entire experience that you're having, really isn't aligned, really isn't accurate to your own inner authority and your own inner integrity. It's like, well, I feel shame because everybody in my family was a doctor and I was told that I need to be a doctor. And if I'm not a doctor, I will disappoint my father. And my father is getting very old. And this is the one thing I said I could do for him in order for, you know, it would be disloyal. I would hurt him. I would cause pain to my father if I did not walk in his path and honor the commitment that I made when I was young to be a doctor, to follow my lineage, to follow that line, and to make him happy. So you experience shame when you choose to do something else. That feeling of shame is also giving you information that you now need to look at and really question yourself and move into your own inner authority. Recognize that you were living in an outer authority story, narrative, loyalty, and you have to ask, is that actually right? Is that actually fair? Aligned to the higher authority of God. To your inner guidance system. What does your inner guidance system tell you you are supposed to be, where you are supposed to go? And if it is not, if that inner guidance says, I'm supposed to walk this way, but my family wants me to walk this way, it's normal that you experience shame, but this would be sort of this would be an indicator that you need to align where outer authority has a grip on you. Doesn't mean you push your family away. It doesn't mean there's any kind of, hate or bad blood. They can be mad at you. But, that what is being addressed, that shame is indicating something very real within you that needs to be corrected. So when we are on our journey into inner authority, one of the best things that we can do is develop a healthy relationship with our fear of death, fear of shame, and fear of power, and develop tools and strategies that help us to really understand what's happening and release those fears. And as those get released, as we have a healthier relationship with shame, as we shift from death into transformation, as we shift out of abuse of power or a problem with power into love as power, love as, creativity, creative power, love as power, aligned and sacred creation, then these fears slowly, move away, go away, dissolve, and we become stronger and stronger in inner authority. So that is all I wanted to go through for today. I hope you found something of value in this video, and I look forward to connecting with you more. If you are interested in other journeys and diving deeper into this information, definitely come check out the website and learn more about what this is actually one of the chapters that in a journey that I'm going to be doing. I believe it's in January. This is part of chapter 1, that's called To Whom Do You Bow? And so this will be actually a whole 3-hour intensive, meditative, reflective lecture, mix of things, journey on kind of bringing a deeper awareness into, bringing in a deeper awareness of outer authority and inner authority, and committing to an aligned inner authority path as just one part of the journey, and then there are many. Okay, I'll talk to you all soon. Much love and strength. Have a wonderful week.